Kia ora koutou, he honore nui tēnei ki te tū kei mui a koutou ki te kōrero. Ko te mea tuatahi mihi atu au ki a koutou o Tainui o Waikato, koutou o tēnei Whare Wānanga, tēnā koutou. Last time I was here, I was singing with my band on the stage. I'm having little flashbacks and it was all perfect too. I just want to start off with a little song because I remember that when we were doing the marches, the mobilisations against the TPPA, I wrote a song to encourage people who weren't, didn't have that kind of activist gene to kind of think about getting off the fence, because it can be quite an exciting, inspirational thing to do. So I'm just gonna go back into that song that I haven't sung for many years. This little thing that became one of our anthems. When will you put your hands up and do something? Will you speak out or sing nothing? There is so much we have to lose. But if you move like this, take your time, you get used to it. There's no good reason we can't make a change. So get off the fence, it's far too crowded. Take a chance now, scream and shout it. Now's the time to put your hands up. Kia ora. Okay. Now, it's lovely to do this mahi. 48 hours ago, I was watching a panel on the Prostitution Reform Act, a very interesting, engaging panel whose participants were reflective, snappy, fabulous, insightful, relevant and real. No pressure. So, Ngā Toki Whakarururanga, which we are all part of, as Annette described, emerged out of the claim and out of a mediation, and it's fair to say it's a work in progress. It's frustrating, exciting. It's exciting and it's hopeful. Moana Jackson is sitting on our shoulders, and the one term that I always have in my ear is incrementalism is stasis if it doesn't lead to transformation. So when some of us get hoha and want to bail out or want to make some big compromises, we keep having that saying in our head. Ngā Toki Whakarururanga is not a trade entity. We are not about trade. We are not a stakeholder. The point of our existence is to honour and to advocate for the active protection of our rights as Māori under Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga, and not allow our rights, the rights of our people, to be subject to a balancing act. This is our sole purpose of being. And when we want to do a runner, then we think, okay, this is really important. Stay put, have a drink and stay put. Okay, so today I am hosting a number of panels with members of our Brains Trust. And the first panel question is, what does a Tiriti-based approach to trade agreements look like? So what are the principles and the practices derived from He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti that would guide a Tiriti-based version of the TPPA, CPTPP? We all struggle with these damn acronyms. God, I hate them. Okay, so this is the kaupapa, and I've got two lovely guests here. So I say the brainy ones, Annette and Jess. Now, I'll throw this one to you first, Annette. You'll be able to pick up on it pretty quickly. One of the key questions in Y2522 was whether the unilateral negotiation of an international agreement purporting to bind everyone in the country, such as TPPA, is a valid exercise of kāwanatanga granted to the Crown in Te Tiriti. Okay? Now, Moana Jackson, in his evidence, said no. Carwyn Jones was going to speak to this, but his flight was cancelled. But our brain trust is expensive. So Annette is we're going to have this little convo, Annette. And I know you're very familiar with his work. Would you like to share with us some of the thinking that was part of his affidavit?
Yeah, so Moana was one of the primary witnesses for us, and he drew on his constitutional understanding of He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti, reminding us that they were both examples of Te Tiriti making exercises that pre-existed our current reality. Now, Moana had a theory of knowledge. I think it's really important, or mātauranga Māori. I think I saw signs of kaupapa Māori philosophies, but it was guided by a framework called papa, okay? Philosophy, assumption, praxis, and action. And when you look at why he said no, that the unilateral development of a free trade arrangement in the absence of Māori participation and agreement, free, prior, informed consent. He said, what was the papa? Well, the first thing is that it was based on power that was assumed by the Crown, which of itself is inconsistent with Te Tiriti. Because Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga protected the absolute authority, the tino rangatiratanga, the supreme authority to hapu and their communities to make decisions that would advance the interests of their people. If all of us that are Te Tiriti analysts, that's a very simple understanding if you look at the preamble, Article 2 and Article 4, that was the oral engagement at Waitangi. Those things were really important. The tikanga-based concept of power isn't based on the assumption of power of someone else. It's based on mana. So whakapapa is really important. And so when the Crown makes decisions for Māori, they immediately do not qualify. They have no whakapapa Māori. Even though, and I see we have some of the MFAT people here, working for kāwanatanga, they are there working as part of the whakapapa kāwanatanga, not the whakapapa of hapu. And that concept of power is really important when you look at mana enhancing behaviours like treaty making exercises. The key component parts of mana, he said, included the right to treat, our ability to engage with and make decisions with other nations. And it was a natural part of our life. There's tātou pounamu, for example, between Te Aroha and Mātātua that we're all aware of. There are tātou pounamu between Tūhoi and Kahumunu that we're all aware of. And here's these examples, that these were the powers of us exercising our mana to treat with other nations that we were coexisting with. And that exercise of mana was paramount. He said the use of treaties in Māori law and diplomacy were really important about two things: maintaining whanaungatanga, cementing relationships, and about promoting peace, securing trade, negotiating borders, and protecting the exercise of mana. So if you're not engaging with the people who have that mana, then it's a natural, I think it's a logical conclusion that they are making a treaty that is inconsistent with the mana tuku iho of the hapu and inconsistent therefore with the whakapapa. He then talks about sites of power. He's talked about it, and I don't propose to go through a lot of that, but one of the things he talks about in our context is that there's a site of power that they've established in the kāwanatanga called Parliament. But that doesn't mean to say because we don't have a Parliament, hapu and communities of groups that may coalesce together don't have sites of power. That's the furthest thing from the truth. And the problem is, the Crown keeps saying, we don't know how to deal with. You know, there's so many of you. They can actually deal with 450 farmers. You know,
Annette, I'm recalling a flashback, and I mentioned to you before, when we were in the tribunal, that a Crown official said out loud we don't know who to talk to. We don't know in the Māori world who to talk to. I was looking at the panellists, you know, the tribunal members and everybody that was in the room. It was quite an astounding thing to say.
And they're still saying it sometimes. They're saying now, they've changed the discourse. There's too many of you to talk with now. There's FOMA, there's iwi leaders, there's Te Taumata, there's all the specific iwi that are the super iwi that have got all the corporate structures. They're still saying it. They've changed the discourse. The point is, that's not our problem. You entered into a constitutional foundation zone that recognised those sites of power, and it's time for you to develop an engagement policy. And the other thing I just wanted to highlight is that in the absence of this respect for the mana and the whakapapa of those sites of power, you can actually look at these instruments as the way to legalise the further dispossession of our mātauranga and our taonga. And that's the fundamental breach of Te Tiriti that he highlighted. And in the context of data, that I think was the persuasive part of his argument to help the tribunal find, as they did, that there had been a breach of Te Tiriti and the failure to ensure in the data sovereignty space at the moment that there was respect of the sites of power, of mana, enhancing groups that own mātauranga and protect it for their own use first before it's actually commercialised. And then the example he gave was the Manuka case.
What impact did his evidence have on the claim?
Well, it must have had big impact. He was very sick when I first briefed him. He just discovered he had his illness. So we didn't get it on time. Moana was unable to finish it. So the Crown opposed it from actually being part of the stage one. So in fact, people didn't want Moana Jackson's foundational papa to actually be the evidence. So we went through the first part where we didn't win without it, but in the second part, he was absolutely adamant that he was going to give it, and then the Crown didn't want to cross-examine him. So that's an interesting a discussion in himself, because he is the guru. We all know that. He was the guru, he is the guru. I don't think any other Māori philosopher can actually put what he did. And his conclusion that what was happening, and is still happening, is inconsistent with He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti, is at last agreed to by the tribunal, but I don't think it's yet taken on either by the cabinet or the executive of power, or by some of the officials working in this space. And it's not just MPAC. MPI, there's a whole lot of them. MB.
You mentioned that it's surprising that we're in a new era now. We have MFAP is funding this conference. There have been, more engagement with the ministry over the years and with our group Ngā Toki Whakarururanga. What changes do you think have occurred towards a more tiriti-based approach since you first began becoming involved in this area?
So in the mediation, we actually enabled a mediation between leadership. And I think Moana, everyone, Moana, she's saying a beautiful waiata, but she's a diplomat amongst us. And she talks about this activate, but she's got the arts of diplomacy that Moana talks about that our people possess. And our leadership came through in the mediation. And that was led at that time largely by Moana. Matthew Tukaki was there for the New Zealand Māori Council, and Peter Tipene was there for the people from the north. So those three, I have to say, in that mediation or leadership. And I believe they matched that leadership, but unfortunately not with the CEO of the MFAT, but a CEO of a part of the MFAT. And that's been a huge problem for me all the way through, is that rangatira to rangatira should be permeating all our discussions. And they keep trying to diminish it to a section or a division of MFAT, rather than looking at the treaty-making process as a site of power with Kāwanatanga and a site of power with Māori. Having said that, you have now got regular meetings with yourself and Peter Tipene as our leadership group, with technocrats advising you, like Maui, Carrie's here, Carrie Stoddart, Holly's here. We've got this young brains trust that are emerging to help, and I think structurally that's really important. But I still feel like we're on pati-pati train ride, not enough resources, and I'm sick of pati-pati, not P-U-T-T-Y people, P-A-T-I, P-A-T-I. You know, we're constantly looking at resources, and if we hadn't had the support of Minister Jackson at times of struggle, and Minister Mahuta, I don't know if we would have got here, because I didn't feel some people were backing for us. Certainly at the cabinet level I'm talking about, executive level. Prime Minister Ardern, I personally tried to get here and she kept pushing me off. So that's what I'd like to see some changes. And our advice, it's incrementalism, is status. Well, they try and make us these incrementalists, you know, Annette, when you come and tell me, how if we had a ISDS, if it's an investor state dispute process, how can we get Māori to come and advise or sit with the Crown, knowing that only the kāwanatanga can actually represent in those kind of investor states? And they even had the cheek to ask me if I'd consider to be Crown Counsel, which I'd never do in my life, okay, to meet that obligation. So they still don't get it. We need to be at the table in the mana enhancing way representing it. However, nobody I know has got the dial of some of these people like you've got them, you and Pippa. And so there is a relationship of respect developing, but it's still, as Moana said, incremental and in breach of Te Tiriti obligations or what the conduct that is expected of diplomats.
Well, not really Kāhui, but thank you. So, Jess, you're a claimant in Y262. It seems like such a long time ago and it's such a landmark event really in Te Ao Māori. And now you're providing input into the new American-led negotiation called IPEF. Can you break that one down, please?
No, I can't, but that's all right.
Okay. IPEF, what is it? Kāhui, you won. IPEF, so if you would, and given your background and the kind of issues that you were looking at, if you were designing a Tiriti-based process, an Indigenous-led framework for developing international rules for food in the trade space, what would that look like?
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi kia koutou, ki te hau kāinga mihi atu kia koutou. Ko wai o kua hiuri o ngai kahu ngā whiwhira pake tahi atu taha no India, toki mana maputarati ia, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for that part. I am here representing Te Waka Kaiora, who joined the Y262 claim in 2007 around the therapeutic products bill, as Annette said earlier. And it's almost 20 years later and we're having that same fight all over again. So frustration. But in the food and farming space, in terms of a Te Tiriti approach, what I think we need to be doing is we need to be moving right away to agroecological, organic, regenerative and hua parakore approaches to farming. And it's a call out to those of you who are in the audience who are representing the interests of Māori agribusiness, of Māori exporting in food and farming, to think about the ongoing damage that is done with food, conventional food and farming, and pouring poisons onto the whenua. So I heard the student who kōrero earlier this morning use the language, you know, we're looking at ways of living that provide sustainable opportunities. Well, I can tell you right now as an organic farmer, as a hua parakore farmer, that pouring glyphosate, synthetic nitrogen fertilisers, is not congruent with tikanga Māori and poisoning papatūānuku. So if we want to talk about trade in food and farming, from my standpoint, from the standpoint of Te Waka Kaiora, the National Māori Organics Group, it's very clear that we need to return back to those principles, those tikanga Māori principles, of actually elevating the mana of Hineahōni, not pouring poisons on our atua and then making a profit from it and then trying to open up trade opportunities to increase what I would call capitalist patriarchy. And I just want to stay on this concept of capitalist patriarchy for a while actually, because the time has come about where we need to call it out again, because it's coming through the doors 21 years after the Royal Commission on Genetic Modification in the forms of GMOs. So when I talk about capitalist patriarchy, I'm talking about a way of thinking, and it's really conversations over the decades with Moana that's layered this thinking. Along with Indian activists like Vandana Shiva, whose work I've followed for probably 3 decades now, the rules of capitalist patriarchy denigrate both women and the environment, and they do it to further their aims or further capitalism. And so the poisoning of our whenua through conventional farming, through the feeding of 40 million people where our food is exported overseas, does nothing to uplift the mana both of our people to feed our people, but also to of the environment. And I don't know why we don't have these conversations in Te Ao Māori. I don't know why we pussyfoot around and we don't call it out. And so thank you for singing that waiata at the beginning, because the time for fence sitting on these issues is completely over. We don't even have a generation to fix this issue. The FAO, the United Nations arm of the Food and Agricultural Organisation, tells us we only have 50 harvests left globally in the world because of global soil degradation. And so what do we do now? Now the capitalist patriarchs and the corporations are looking to vertical farming, looking to GMOs. Maybe we can GMO the soil microbiome and then we can repair the harm. But what we need to remember about GMOs, there's 2 things that I want to say about GMOs. One is about the impact on tikanga. There were 9 Māori groups that participated in the Royal Commission. We were one of them, Annette, with a rōpū called Ngā Wahine Te Aki o Te Ao, with people like Angeline Greensall as well, who were with us in that rōpū, where we went to the Royal Commission and we made very clear statements that GMOs impact on the mauri, the mana and the whakapapa of a living organism. They also to open up the pathway for patents and intellectual property rights to be taken out over living organisms. These are over our whanaunga. So there's those concerns around GMOs, but the other concern around GMOs is that it's actually about the concentration of wealth and power back within capitalist patriarchal structures. So it's not going to be Māori women who are going to benefit or our pockets will be lined. It will see the further concentration of wealth back into these, back into the billionaires, back into those billionaires that, we just know that the number is reduced and reduced and reduced every year. And a smaller number of people are owning the world's wealth. Well, a smaller number of people are about to own living organisms in the soil microbiome. And our role as Indigenous peoples is to speak up about it. Indigenous women around the world are creating a movement called rematriation, speaking up for the ancestral rights of our Earth Mother and of Hinea Hone. And the time is now really for us to be able to do it. And it's time for Māori agribusiness to step off that global agribusiness financial, stream that we're on, and to look towards transitioning. And that's not just transitioning to regenerative agriculture, and I want to be really clear about that, because regenerative agriculture still opens the way for GMOs, it still opens the way to use synthetic fertilisers, nitrogen-based fertilisers on the whenua. There's no caveats around regenerative agriculture. I actually see it as another way for capitalist patriarchy to infiltrate food and farming. So we need to talk about it as organic regenerative, or hua parakore regenerative agriculture. So it is the time to speak up, and how we do that in a trade context when we are negotiating, or when our governments are negotiating, agricultural chapters that are riddled with GMOs, is really difficult. And I'm really pleased with in Ngā Toki that we're working in a Brains Trust collective, thank you Jane, to be able to try and counter that. But here we go again.
So Jess, just out of interest, what is it like when you have conversations with Māori food producers and those in the agricultural field? I mean, is there an assumption that they're on the kaupapa? Does there need to be more advocacy around that?
There is the Māori organics movement, and the uptake of hua parakore is happening on small scale. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, because small-scale food farming really is what is feeding the world anyway, and it's what is going to feed the world, this notion of coming back to hyper-local food systems. But we have very little, if any, approaches from iwi food and farming businesses to come on a hua parakore pathway, to come on a organic pathway, and there's very little participation from Māori agribusiness in organics that I know of. I know Ngāi Tahu are doing a pilot trial of 2 regenerative farms that got some big government funding. But where's the investment in organics? Where's the investment in Parakore? And so the question is really, how can all of these conversations about trade turn it around so we can actually start to honour the landscapes and the deity, Papatuanuku Hiniahone, of which actually we serve. You know, as a Parakore food farmer, my role is to elevate the mana of Hiniahone, not to take from the soil, but really to ask what can I do to uplift her.
One might think that there's a global trend that would be an attractive marketing carry-on thingy. You know what I mean?
Well, there is a big global trend with the EU, FTA, and the words escape me now, the Green Deal. You know, there is a movement. You know, the EU is setting these standards where they're going to require New Zealand to have equivalence. But the EU also too have a list of banned pesticides, which I think there's probably about, 30 I think they ban about 120. We only ban about 30 of those. So we are pouring pesticides and chemicals on our whenua at a rate that they don't even accept them or pour them on in other parts of the world. So we like to think, and we trade on this clean green image. We're so far away from it. And, you know, if anyone's in the audience who's involved in Māori agribusiness and is interested in transitioning to Parakore to Māori organics, please be in touch with the Māori Organics group with Te Waka Kaiora, because we say we're leading, but I'm not proud that Indigenous people are leading out in trade in ways where actually we denigrate the environment.
And just in terms of the IPEF, what kind of impact are you able to have on those negotiations?
Well, I've been to a meeting, incremental at its best, almost feel like I'm going through the motions of speaking because we have created an opportunity for us in Ngā Toki to be heard. But being heard is one thing, being understood is another. Being heard, understood, and then action to be taken is probably where we are tracking to, and we're not even there yet. In fact, we, as far as I know, haven't had a response from the meeting with MFAT officials that we had a few months ago, where I was asked to talk about the impacts of GMOs from the standpoint of Te Waka Kaiora. You know when you're talking with people and they've tuned off. You know when they're just being polite. And so these are deep-seated concerns. It will be our children and our grandchildren who will come back to us 30 or 40 years later and say, what were you thinking letting GMOs into Aotearoa? Just one last point on GMOs. We actually are in a really fantastic position geographically in Aotearoa to be an organic seed saver for the rest of the world. They've missed the boat in the EU, they've missed it in North America and in Canada. GMOs, you know, although they're growing in farms and, you know, you've got contamination outside buffer zones, but not in Aotearoa. You know, and what I see in the coming generations is people are going to be looking for heirloom seeds, they're going to be looking for diversity. We know resilience is in diversity. If we move down that path of GMOs, one, we're not going to own the seeds, but GMOs are all about monocultures, and we have just seen the impact of monocultures into Tairāwhiti with Pinus radiata. So, you know, it's not just saying no, it's saying no and here's the opportunity. Organic regenerative Parakore seeds, organic seed saving for the rest of the world.
Oh, kia ora, geez. That's a fascinating era. Now, I was just thinking, wasn't it in the news this week? What weren't GMOs being debated?
So Luxon National have come out and made an announcement that at Field Day, such an original place to make that announcement, that if they're elected, they'll open the debate again around GMOs. They will have a fight on their hands, and this is the time where, and I look to the rangatahi in the audience, we took to the streets 20 years ago. There was a really big movement in Aotearoa, and we're going to need to do it again. The rhetoric of the National Party and who want to open up again the debate around GMOs, and also to Gluckman, is you know, this idea that we're going to miss out. Oh, we're going to miss out, we're not going to be a leader. Personally, I don't want our country to be a leader in GMOs. I want our country to be a leader in organic regenerative. I want our country to be a leader in soil health where the roots are driving down this deep with this much diversity of plant species. That's the type of leadership we need to demonstrate to the rest of the world, not this notion of missing out.
Are there many Pākehā allies? I mean, how broad is that base that's supporting that?
Broad, so the Free Aotearoa movement's just regathering in the next 4 weeks, and Te Waka Kaiora is going to join that movement. Te Waka Kaiora, we're really active about it, but we've, like all of us, have been on other kaupapa, but we're ready to fight it again.
Kia pai. Now, Annette, just picking up on Jess's point, what needs to happen in that? The question was around what a treaty-based approach to trade agreements looks like, and you teased out Moana's affidavit. What do we need to change in order to be able to accommodate and support and advocate for the position that Jess has been talking about?
Well, first of all, we need Māori to organise ourselves, and we don't need the kawana to facilitate who they bring into the room. That's one of the key problems that I see. They tend to put a dichotomy when they bring people in the room, like Annette Sykes for the radicals, someone from FOMA and someone from iwi leaders. That's just too simplistic because the labels don't work. We need to set our own planning strategies for the kind of futures that Jess has described, which I think are Indigenous obligations from, we look to the past to our future. And some of us are working in different spaces. Like I'm trying to get Te Mana o Te Wai to reduce phosphate and to set limits on the use of agri-fertilisers at farming level and have farming plans that are required to actually be obligated to that. So we need to do policy amongst Māori first, across every sector, which mutually reinforce those values. Then we need to determine our leadership, as we did in Ngā Toki with yourself and Peter or whomever, meeting with whomever, because it's not just MFAC, it's MPI, MB, Te Puni Kōkiri, there's some of the worst Māori capitalists I've ever seen, all working together against us. And we need to then try and design a future for our Aotearoa New Zealand state that is born from the framework of Te Oranga o Te Taiao, Te Mana Motu Hake o Papatuanuku, Te Mina o Papatuanuku. There's a constitutional dynamics like that in South America, Bolivia, Vandana in India. There are dynamics of this emerging around the world. We need to join that leadership rather than be led by the nose down a neoliberal capitalist framework.
I know that when we first started Ngā Toki, it was one of our goals was to organise ourselves, Te Ao Māori, to identify and develop clear positions on various issues, because we are always finding ourselves reacting, aren't we? Which is a incredibly frustrating space to be in. So how optimistic are you, Annette, that we're making progress on kind of organising ourselves? I mean, it's a big ask, isn't it, trying to organise the Māori side, and then you're scrapping with the Crown side sometimes.
So I think I look to the future of our young people, because I do see that. When we were at university, for example, you and I,
last century,
law school, there was 5 of us, Now there's 500 Māori. If I go to the economics department where I did my other degree, there was 3 of us, and now there's 300 Māori. So we aren't all of that other philosophy. We bring our own Indigenous approach. So I'm optimistic. I think we need to also stop cementing ourselves within frameworks the Crown has constructed, like settlements from treaties. That wasn't a treaty settlement. That was just about appeasing an effort to enable them to carry on with their agenda of exploitation of our resources. Remember, the fiscal envelope said we couldn't deal with water, we didn't own minerals, we didn't own the ability to make decisions of authority over Papatuanuku. Those decisions were still vested in regional councils. And so I actually think we're going to change that. I like this term mana whakahaere. It's a term that was first used for me when Hikurangi Maunga was returned back to Ngāti Porou. And it was returned back to the hapu to have the mana whakahaere of their mountains and their waters. And I would like that term at local place to include us all. Marae-based individuals who are Parakore activists, doctors and nurses that are talking about changing lifestyles for well-being, not about treating us as sick people, but making us healthy so we don't become sick. And that, I think, we're Māori, we're leading that way, because we've been forgotten for too long. And MFAT and all those other groups need to catch up, because frankly their thinking is a little bit outdated. It's 30 or 40 years ago. They haven't kept the pace, like Jessica pointed out. You know, EU had to. They've been dragged there by the Green movement. And I think that might have to happen here, because of course we've got ACT and National Party now promoting a very extraordinary transformation backwards to a capitalist framework, which I thought we had escaped in the 1980s.
Kia ora. Now, I wonder if we have any questions for Jess or Annette. I'm like last century, I couldn't get the app thing working because I can't remember my Apple ID. Sorry.
Okay, so what we're going to do,
Those questions there.
Can you take this off? I'll bugger it up. You do it.
I don't know.
Hey, your microphone. Just bug it up.
Kia ora mihi after Sarang, Waikato Maniapoto Apakura. Before 1864, Rangiawhio, which we consider to be a war crime, was a trading settlement, and Ngā Toki Maniapoto had trading vessels. So I'll just spell it right. Flour was traded, so where within the CPTPP is the Crown sitting on accepting this wrong? It's really about economic justice, and essentially from 1864 we were extremely involved in organic farming and trading, and I suppose we really need to go back in time and look at that and then make the Crown pick up on that.
I'm happy to
Is there a question?
just form part of the answer around the, addressing Hua Parakore, and that's really where the emergence of this movement came from. Mōtito, led by Percy Tepani's, now passed away. All of these people sitting on our shoulders who started these movements, whose work that we're carrying on. And the whakaaro and the establishment of the Māori Organics Group was that our people have always been doing organics. We've always been Hua Parakore. This is what we've done. But in Aotearoa, there were 4 organic standards, but not one of them provided a kaupapa Māori pathway to bring tikanga Māori or to enable telling a kaupapa Māori story around food and farming. So that's how the Hua Parakore came about, through a 3-year kaupapa Māori research project led in 2011. However, and I'm getting around to answering your question, there's been no support from Kāwanatanga at all for the implementation of Hua Parakore. So there's all of this investment, there's even a Māori agribusiness team in MPI, there's funding for Māori agribusiness, there's no funding for Hua Parakore or Māori organics. So how are we actually, how are we supposed to grow a pathway at speed, because environmentally, as we know, we do not have time to sit around and ponder this. How are we supposed to grow this and have this transition happen at speed when there's no funding and when the structures are not enabling? So even the trade structures are not enabling for organics. Most of our producers are small, and so that doesn't, enable for exporting. So how can we reframe trade, bring indigeneity to trade in a way where actually we can do native to native trading as Hua Parakore? We have Hua Parakore Indigenous producers in other parts of the world as well. and they bring their own tikanga, their own kawa, their own kōrero to the use of that framework. And I've been in Turtle Island at the beginning of the year this year on some seed sovereignty work, meeting with First Nations women, part of repatriation movements. And they wanted to give me seeds back. This was their koha. You know, they really wanted to give us some seeds to take back to Aotearoa. I had to explain our biosecurity rules, you know, a little bit hard, don't know if we can really do that. But people who came up from Peru were bringing seeds. This is what they koha in between their communities. We don't even have the right to be able to do that anymore. And then they shared the phenomenal story about the corn braids, you know, First Nations women in Turtle Island having to put the corn seeds in their hair when the colonisers were chasing them, moving them off their lands, and that was the way they could ensure food security for their people. Put their seeds in their hair, the notion of corn braids. I never knew that. And so, you know, the resilience and the ingenuity of Indigenous women to continue to feed people and the resistance of colonisation. But I love your question, and it's really important. And again, it's, you know, back to Kāwanatanga, MFAT, MPI, MB, open the pathways, release the money, because it's essentially our money that you've taken off Māori through the use of funding capitalist patriarchy. You know, and we want to turn that ship around right now.
We've got one more question up here. Apologies, people. I'm going to move on after this question. These wonderful wahine are going to be around. You grab them, ask them the questions that they haven't been responded.
Okay.
Kia ora.
My question's kind of different, but the same about papatuanuku and the behalf of papatuanuku. If we're questioning about agriculture and the chemicals that go in there, is there someone that's questioning the embalming processes as well of the chemicals that come through there?
I think for all, the Coroner's Act was under review recently, and yes, they are. But I just want to add to what Jessica's saying. We don't wait for the Crown. We've got to set up our own systems of mātauranga Māori and practices, and they will follow us. You know, if we keep waiting to persuade the Crown to give us permission to do this or provide resourcing, we'll be waiting a long time. I've been waiting for 40 years, as I try to describe. So we just got to take the initiative, and yes, and we are. You know, I go to Tangi now where the first one I went to was Irirangi Te Akeawa. There was a complete denial of the use of that embalming process, which is required under the law to enable that tohunga to be properly given the send back to our ancestors that he deserved. I went to Joe Malcolm's. There's quite a few. All of them are doing the same kind of thing at home, Te Pōroa. I don't think anyone's been prosecuted yet. You just got to do it, and then the law will catch up to you. That's just my view on this.
Okay, thank you. Just to finish off, Jess, so the question was, what does a tiriti-based approach to trade agreements look like? What would be the key principle that you would take from He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti to guide a tiriti-based version of any kind of these big agreements? What would be the key principle we have to keep to the forefront?
Well, for me, it would be rangatiratanga just comes straight to mind. And this is what we've done in the Māori Organics movement, exactly like what Annette's saying. We didn't wait for the Crown to say, yes, you can develop a Māori Organics framework. We just did it. And we just set up our own system. And it became, last year we had over 60 collectives join up in the first year of Hua Parakore, and we had to close it because we're a voluntary organisation. No one really gets paid. And we're administering this verification system which has to have integrity at the heart of it. So that's rangatiratanga. We're just doing it. Now we want to do it, and our Māori producers want to export Hua Parakore. So now we're in this position where we have to go, well, how can FTAs help us? Because at the moment they're not helping us.
It's rangatiratanga with limits though. I think some people are equating rangatiratanga to economic sovereignty where there is no limits on choice, and they misunderstand our values, because rangatiratanga, kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga must be seen as a collective of values that work as limits to each other to ensure that we we respect our mother. And for me, that's one of the key challenges, is don't be matapiko. Rangatiratanga is not about absolute power without limitation. And the limitation is the respect to future generations and your mother. Real simple stuff, but quite often the economic sovereignty arguments have actually overcome the ecological obligation of that economic sovereignty to the detriment of our lifestyles, our ways of life, and we're seeing it in Cyclone Gabriel, like we saw it in Cyclone Bola. This isn't new, but we actually seem to suffer from amnesia until we actually have climate change events like that to remind us of how our behaviours are actually causing mischief to our mother.
Kia ora, Annette. And I'm reminded of the last hui that we had with our kaihotu, that we rearranged the lineup of kupu that was rights and interests, duties and responsibilities. We flipped them because rangatiratanga is about responsibilities and accountabilities and duties. So just want to thank you both on behalf of all of us for all your mahi and your lovely stimulating kōrero. So thank you very much. Please, kia ora.